Here is what the political class does not want you to sit with. In the last 6 months, 3 of Nigeria's most powerful opposition figures, men who could not agree on a dinner reservation, have held quiet, undocumented meetings in the same city. No joint press statement, no leaked audio, no social media post. Just silence. And in Nigerian politics, organized silence is not peace, it is preparation. While every headline is focused on TINUBU'S policies, the fuel subsidy removal, the Naira float, the tax reform bills, the real question nobody's asking is this: is the opposition finally building the machinery to make 2027 a real contest? And if so, what does that machine actually look like? Stay with me, because by the time we reach the second half of this video, you are going to understand why the answer to that question changes everything you think you know about what comes next. Before we go any further, if you are new to this channel, welcome. Naija Inside Desk exists for one reason: to give you the kind of analysis that goes beyond the headlines and the noise. Subscribe now, because this conversation is about to get deeper. Let me establish exactly what triggered this conversation, because the timing here is not accidental. It never is. In the last quarter, 2 things happened in rapid succession. First, the PDP's National Working Committee began quiet internal consultations about what a 2027 candidate looks like. Not publicly, not with fanfare, but through back-channel engagements with state governors who have been increasingly uncomfortable with the federal government's direction. Second, Peter Obi's NDC party filed a formal notice of renewed grassroots mobilization in 12 states, 5 of which Tinubu won in 2023. Now, is this new? Not entirely. Nigerian opposition cycles have a rhythm. Opposition figures fracture during elections, then regroup in the years between. What is new this time is the convergence. For the first time since 2023, I am seeing credible signals that 3 opposition platforms, PDP, NDC, ADC party, and a 4th formation still unnamed, are testing whether a coalition framework is possible. Not a merger, a framework. The minimum context you need to understand why this matters is that Tinubu won in 2023 with 37% of the vote. That means 63% of Nigerian voters chose someone else. The mathematics of a united opposition have always been brutal for any sitting president. The question was never whether the numbers existed, it was whether the political will and the personal ambitions could ever be aligned. That alignment for the first time is being tested in real time. I'll come back to that 4th unnamed formation in the second half, because who is behind it will reframe this entire conversation. Let me be precise about the institutions in play here, because this is where most commentary gets lazy. The opposition's path to 2027 runs through 4 pressure points: INEC, the National Assembly, the judiciary, and the party structure itself. Start with INEC. The Electoral Act of 2022, the most significant electoral reform Nigeria has passed in a generation, contains provisions that the opposition believes it can exploit more effectively this time. Specifically, the Electronic Transmission of Results Clause. In 2023, the controversy around BVAS and the IREV portal gave the opposition both a legal argument and a mobilization narrative. That legal argument is still alive in the courts. I am told, and this is from a named source I will reference in a moment, that opposition legal teams are already constructing an institutional pre-litigation framework designed not to reverse 2023, but to set judicial precedent that constrains INEC's operational flexibility in 2027. That is sophisticated. That is not the opposition of 2019. Move to the National Assembly. Tinubu's legislative relationship has been largely cooperative. His allies control both chambers, but the defections have begun. 3 senators and 7 House members in the last 4 months have either publicly distanced themselves from the APC leadership or quietly declined to vote with the executive on key bills. These are not random acts of conscience. In Nigerian legislative politics, nothing is random. When a senator from a zone where the president needs to consolidate support starts missing strategic votes, someone is sending a message. Now, where does legitimate authority end and overreach begin? That question will define 2027 more than any campaign rally. The Constitution is clear on term limits, clear on electoral timelines, clear on legislative independence. What it does not resolve, and has never resolved, is the degree to which a sitting president can legally use state resources, security architecture, and regulatory institutions to manage the political environment. That ambiguity has been exploited by every administration since 1999. The question is whether the opposition this time has the legal infrastructure to challenge it before it is deployed, not after. This is the section where I need you to think like a strategist, not a partisan. Who gains from the current opposition momentum? 3 categories of actors. First, APC governors whose relationship with the presidency has cooled. Men who want leverage, not necessarily a Tinubu defeat, but enough credible threat to renegotiate their own terms. Second, international observers and donors who have publicly expressed concern about democratic consolidation in West Africa and are watching Nigeria as a bellwether. Third, Nigerian civil society, particularly the obedient infrastructure that built the most significant youth political movement this country has seen since 1993, which is now older, more institutionally experienced, and far more difficult to dismiss. Who loses? Any opposition figure whose individual presidential ambition requires a fractured field. A united opposition coalition means someone has to be the candidate and someone has to step aside. That calculation has broken every Nigerian coalition attempt in modern memory. The names I hear most consistently in that tension are Atiku Abubakar, who has run for president more times than any Nigerian in the democratic era, and whose northern base remains real and significant, and Peter Obi, whose 2023 performance in Lagos alone demonstrated a cross-cutting appeal that no other opposition figure currently commands. Now, if what you just heard challenged what you thought you knew, drop it in the comments. I want to hear your read on this before we get to the part that reframes everything. The 2027 positioning signals are visible if you know where to look. Pay attention to 3 geopolitical zones. The South-South, where PDP's traditional base is experiencing genuine internal tension over resource control and federal revenue allocation. The Northwest, where security crises have deepened public frustration with the federal government's response architecture. And Lagos, Tinubu's home turf, where local government election controversies have created a political wound that the opposition intends to keep open. Here is the number that should stop you cold. In the 2023 election, Tinubu received fewer votes in Lagos, his own state, than Buhari received in Kano in 2019. I'll let that land for a moment. Who is conspicuously silent? The northern APC governors, men who gave Tinubu his path to the presidency through the zoning compromise now known as the Gentleman's Agreement. Their silence on the emerging opposition story is not disinterest, it is calculation. They are watching to see whether the opposition coalition achieves critical mass before they decide which side of this conversation to be on officially. The second and third order consequences: if a credible opposition coalition materializes by Q1 2026, watch for accelerated APC primaries designed to close the space early. A possible constitutional referendum proposal designed to redirect political energy, and this is the one I want you to remember,
an intensification of anti-corruption prosecutions targeting figures on the opposition flank. Nigeria's anti-corruption architecture, whatever its merits, has never been deployed in a politically neutral way. It will not start now. Step back from the strategy and think about what this means for the country. On federal state power, a credible 2027 contest changes the negotiating dynamics between Abuja and the states immediately. Governors who currently calculate that loyalty to the center is their safest bet will begin to recalibrate if they believe the center is genuinely contestable. That recalibration has downstream consequences for everything from security funding to revenue allocation disputes to the ongoing debate about state police, a conversation that has stalled at the federal level but is gaining momentum in the southwest and southeast simultaneously. On the economy, political uncertainty is not abstract. Every percentage point of naira volatility, every delay in a capital project, every foreign direct investment decision deferred carries a human cost. Nigeria's debt service ratio is already consuming more than 90% of federal revenue. A prolonged pre-election political season, which in Nigerian context can begin as early as 18 months before the election, creates a fiscal environment that will be difficult to manage. For the person watching this from Maiduguri, from Olu, from Sokoto, from Agege, the 2027 political contest is not an elite entertainment. It will determine whether the security architecture in your state gets resourced or neglected, whether the agricultural policy that affects your food prices is sustained or reversed, and whether the person making the decision about your electricity grid was chosen through a credible process or delivered through a manipulated one. That is what is at stake here. On security, this is where I ask you to hold the nuance carefully. Insecurity in Nigeria is not primarily an electoral phenomenon. It has deep structural roots in inequality, land contestation, climate stress, and institutional failure. But the political cycle does affect it. Periods of intense political competition historically coincide with increased mobilization of non-state actors, some ideologically motivated, some opportunistically aligned with political sponsors. I am not making an accusation. I am identifying a pattern that 25 years of Nigerian democratic history has established. Nigeria is not operating in isolation, and the international dimension of this story is being underreported almost everywhere. ECOWAS is navigating the most turbulent moment in its institutional history. The withdrawal of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger from the bloc and the formation of the Alliance of Sahel States has created a structural fault line in West African governance that Nigeria, as ECOWAS's anchor state, is now being asked to manage. A Nigeria entering a contested, divisive electoral cycle is a Nigeria with reduced bandwidth for regional leadership. That is not a theoretical observation. It is a concern I have heard directly expressed by diplomatic sources in Abuja. For the diaspora, and I speak directly to those watching from London, Houston, Toronto, and Johannesburg, here is what you need to understand that the domestic coverage will not tell you clearly. The international credibility of the 2027 process matters for the remittance economy. Nigeria receives more in diaspora remittances than it earns from oil. The confidence of that diaspora in Nigeria's institutional direction is not purely sentimental. It is economic, it is investment, it is whether a Nigerian professional abroad chooses to bring capital home or keeps it offshore. Nigeria's remittance inflows in 2023 exceeded $20 billion. That's more than the entire federal capital budget. The diaspora vote is not just a political symbol. It is the largest single source of foreign exchange this economy has. The political class would do well to remember that the people sending those dollars are watching every single thing that happens in 2027.
I want to still man the argument for the other side before I challenge it, because that is the only intellectually honest way to do this. The strongest argument in favor of TINUBU'S position going into 2027 is this. Structural incumbency in Nigeria is not a marginal advantage. It is a decisive one. Every sitting Nigerian president who has sought re-election since 1999 has won. Obasanjo in 2003, Yar'Adua's successor Jonathan in 2011, Buhari's re-election in 2019. The pattern holds, and it holds for structural reasons. The federal government controls the security apparatus, the regulatory environment, the revenue-sharing framework, and critically, the appointment of INEC's leadership, subject to Senate confirmation. A well-resourced, strategically disciplined incumbent does not need a majority of motivated voters. It needs to manage the logistics of a dispersed, divided opposition. On that calculation, Tinubu starts from a position of real strength. That is the strongest version of the argument. I want you to hold it seriously. Now, here is where the counter-argument cuts through. 2023 introduced something that incumbency models had not fully priced in: the scale and technical sophistication of civil society election monitoring. Yiga Africa, Enough is Enough Nigeria, and dozens of parallel observer networks deployed infrastructure in 2023 that made wholesale result manipulation significantly more difficult than it had been in previous cycles. That infrastructure is not going away. It is being expanded, funded, and institutionalized. The question is not whether the opposition can win in spite of incumbency. The question is whether the monitoring infrastructure can narrow the margin in which incumbency advantages operate. The most common misconception circulating on social media right now is that this is a North versus South story. It is not. The emerging opposition coalition, if it materializes, will cut across regional lines by design. Any serious political strategist running an opposition campaign in 2027 knows that a regional framing is a losing framing. The coalition mathematics require cross-cutting appeal. That means the narrative will be economic, cost of living, purchasing power, fuel prices, not ethnic. And that framing, on current trajectory, is more dangerous for the incumbent than a regional one. I told you in the first 5 minutes that there was a third unnamed political formation behind some of these quiet meetings. Here's what I can tell you. It is not a new party. It is a coalition of civil society actors, former technocrats, and second-generation business figures who are structuring a non-partisan governance advocacy infrastructure, the explicit goal of which is to function as a policy credibility mechanism for whichever opposition candidate is positioned most strongly by mid-2025. Think of it as a policy endorsement architecture. It has foreign philanthropic backing, it has legal counsel in Abuja and Lagos, and it has been meeting since January. Nobody has named it publicly yet. Watch for it. 3 most likely next moves from key actors. From the presidency, an accelerated delivery narrative, visible infrastructure completions, targeted social investment disbursements, and a sustained international engagement calendar designed to project governance competence ahead of any formal campaign season. From the ADC, a carefully managed primary process designed to produce a candidate with genuine northern support and cross-cutting appeal while managing the Atiku question in a way that does not fracture the party's base. From the NDC party and the OB network, a deepening of state-level organizational capacity. The 2023 campaign won votes but did not build ward-level structures in most states. That is being corrected. The goal by 2026 is structural presence, not just social media reach. Specific signals to watch in the coming weeks. Any announcement of cross-party consultations, even informal ones, from governors currently aligned with APC. Any INEC regulatory adjustment that affects candidate substitution rules or party financing thresholds. Any judicial ruling in the lingering 2023 election petitions that reopens legal questions about results transmission. Under what conditions does this escalate? If the opposition coalition achieves a formal, publicly announced framework before the 2025 mid-cycle, expect an aggressive executive and legislative response, both through policy and through the regulatory environment. Under what conditions does it de-escalate? If the coalition fractures on the candidate question, which is the single most likely point of failure, the opposition returns to the fragmented state of 2023, and the incumbent's path to re-election becomes structurally straightforward. The 12-month outlook. By mid-2025, we will know whether the coalition framework is real or performative. There is no middle path. Either it survives the candidate negotiation or it does not. The 3-year outlook, if it does survive,
2027 will be the most genuinely competitive Nigerian presidential election since 1993. If it does not, the story of 2027 will be incumbency consolidation, and the question will shift from who wins to how the democratic infrastructure holds up under the weight of that consolidation. Let me return to where we started. I asked you, is the opposition actually building the machinery to make 2027 a real contest? Here's my answer, grounded in everything we have examined. Yes, but it's a conditional yes, and the condition is the one that has broken every Nigerian opposition since the return to democracy, the candidate question. Every other piece of the architecture, the legal framework, the monitoring infrastructure, the diaspora engagement, the civil society formation, the grassroots organizational work is real and it is growing. But none of it matters if three men who each believe they are the most qualified person to lead this country cannot find a framework for one of them to step aside. Nigeria's democratic trajectory depends not on whether the opposition is capable. It clearly is. It depends on whether the opposition is disciplined. And that discipline has so far been the one thing that ambition has reliably destroyed. That is not a prediction. It is a pattern, and patterns can be broken. I want to hear where you think that pattern breaks or holds. Challenge this analysis. Correct it if you have information I do not. Extend it where it falls short. One thread I am deliberately leaving open: the role of the judiciary in the 12 months before the election. We haven't had that conversation fully, and when we do, the implications will be significant. Stay close to this channel. If this analysis gave you clarity, not agreement, clarity, share it with one person who needs to understand what is actually happening. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.